Here we go in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Vol Talk podcast. I'm back again with Dakota. If you didn't watch the Kentucky review, Blake is out on his honeymoon. He got married this past weekend. Really happy for Blake. Congrats, Blake, for getting married. He will be back. He's just taking a 2-episode break. He offered to do the podcast on his honeymoon in his cabin, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think Rachel will appreciate that very much. So we are having another episode with Dakota once again. I appreciate Dakota being on here. What's going on, man?
Appreciate you having me. Congrats again to Blake. Trying my best to honor you, bud. Have fun on your honeymoon. Yeah.
All right. So we're talking about Mississippi State this week, man. Mississippi State, the week before Georgia, so maybe a trap game. Maybe we'll overlook Mississippi State, although they are by far the worst team in the SEC.
They are atrocious. Yeah, we got back-to-back Bulldogs. So we get the pregame Bulldog before the big game Bulldog. But yeah, statistically, watch-wise, coach, they may just be the worst team in the SEC by far.
Especially defensively.
Defensively, I mean, if there was ever a game where the offense can get things back together and clicking on all cylinders, it's against the team that's given up 311 points in the season so far.
Oh, so hit me with those stats. What are some of the stats that tell you that this defense is like all-time bad?
So in the SEC specifically, not nationally, but in the SEC specifically, they're giving up 462 yards per game. And for context, the next closest was Arkansas, who we struggled against, which isn't a great sign, but they give up 387. So it's 80 yards more. And for context, on a good defense, we only give up 271. They give up almost 200 yards more per game. And then scoring-wise, they've given up 311 for 35 a game, and the next closest is 237. And then there's 12 teams in the SEC that's not even given up 200. We've only given up 99. They've given up 311. So
that is absurd, dude. That is absurd. Yeah, I mean, they're historically bad on defense. I will say, though, if you look at their schedule, they fight hard, man. Like, against Georgia, they put up 31 against Georgia. But our defense has been so consistent this year, I just don't feel like Mississippi State's going to be the team that figures it out. Like, I find that hard to believe. But you make a great point with the offense. I think the offense is going to be the focal point of the show just because, you know, we saw in that Kentucky game there was those improvements. It's like, again, it's self-inflicted wounds. If you cut out those self-inflicted wounds, we're looking at a lot more points against Kentucky, who actually has a pretty solid defense. Whereas Mississippi State, as you just pointed out, dude, historically bad defensively. I would love to see us score more than 7 points by halftime. You know, that's literally the last 4 games. We have a combined 7 points in the first half. So I expect that to be a little bit more against Mississippi State. And we'll see how Nico. I mean, it's Nico watch every week, dude. I mean, one of the biggest storylines of the team is, can Nico continue to get better? Can he be consistent? I mean, we just talked about it on the Kentucky review that I really feel like that second half of that Alabama game was a turning point on the season for him. So can he continue to do that against this historically bad Mississippi State defense?
Yeah, I don't want to foreshadow into the next game, but again, like having a team like this to now warm up against and continue that progression leading into the biggest game of the season at that point will be massive for him. And another opportunity for the receivers and him to get on the same page after all the drops in the Kentucky game and getting it at home too, where I think it's a little less likely we're asleep at the wheel at home. You know, if this was a road game, then I probably would be concerned as a trap game because of the record there on the road. But getting them at home, I think, it just set up for the perfect recipe for the team collectively to just have a huge game, to put it fully together defensively and offensively, and make a statement towards, you know, the playoffs down the road. We've got to win big. You know, kind of needed to beat Kentucky by more than we really did to make a statement. So we really need to turn it around. And unfortunately for Levy, we kind of need to run it up on him. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you made a lot of good points there. I think being at home, we probably didn't touch on that enough in the Kentucky review. That kneeling is such an impact in the game, man. I mean, it is so hard to play there. I mean, there's so many pre-snap penalties from the opposing team just because of the noise level. Now, the noise probably won't be as rowdy from the last couple weeks, but it's still such a weapon. I mean, we're so elite at home, so continue that to happen. And yeah, you really do need to make a statement, man, because I mean, we talked about in the Kentucky review that really, if you did an adjusted score, we probably win the game by 4 touchdowns. But the playoff committee doesn't care about that. They're let's be honest, they're not watching. They none of them watched that game. Let's be just completely honest with ourselves. So they didn't see how really well the offense was playing until they shot themselves in the foot. They're not going to look at those kind of things. So you do need to make a statement against a Mississippi State team. And you talk about looking forward to Georgia. Well, as a fan base, that's what we're all doing. We're all looking at Georgia. Now, the team cannot do that. They can't look to Georgia, and we'll see how they perform. But I mean, really, that's what the talk's going to be the next couple of weeks. Is I mean, because Mississippi State, let's be honest, they're 2-7. They had a barn burner against UMass. I mean, they're just not a good football team. So we are all looking ahead to Georgia. And dude, ideally, we come out of this game and the backups are in the second half, dude. Like we're at some point in the second half because I mean that's what we were doing really in the beginning of the season. It's like every game at halftime, all of the backups were in, which was nice. It would be really nice in this game to get extra rest going into that Georgia game, which is going to be, I mean, it's going to be crucial, dude. Oh, everything is on the line in that Georgia game. SEC championship potential appearance, playoff potential appearance. So, I mean, this is like the game that, hey, gotta take care of business and hopefully completely destroy them, get some rest before Georgia, and then go into that Georgia game and hopefully be able to compete.
Yeah, you guys have touched on it multiple times on the pod of as a fan base, we can look ahead. We're allowed to look ahead and wave a game off, but the team can't. Like, they've got to show up each and every week. And I think, don't undervalue coming off of a huge UMass win. They beat the Minutemen. They're ready. Levy's got them boys moving. So,
the momentum of beating UMass.
Yeah, a huge win. But yeah, to your point though, you touched on it with I mean, even against Texas, they played them pretty close. Like they fought in some games, so like they at least have a little fight in them. Their defense is just a big sport, like we talked about. So that'll be the key difference in the game. Is hopefully our offense getting it together. But yeah, we should see Gaston more kneeling in this game.
Yeah,
for sure. If not, then something went horrible.
Exactly.
And honestly, I think the biggest concern really because we've had. I don't think we had any this week, but we had some injuries the past couple of weeks that have taken a toll. So, really, with a game like this, obviously we need to win, and that's the focus. But coming out of it healthy right before Georgia is also really important.
Yeah, it's crucial. Now, we'll say Georgia has Ole Miss this week, so
True.
feel a little better about them having Ole Miss and us having Mississippi State. That's kind of nice. But like treating this almost like it's not going to be a bye week. Bye weeks are completely different. But if you can rest the starters in the second half, it's kind of like a bye week. So that would be so nice. But you're right. I mean, the team can't look past Mississippi State because they have fought. They really they remind me of Vandy this year, but they're just so bad that they can't actually come through and win any games. I mean, but losing by 10 against Georgia, I mean, that's better than what Texas did. So they have fought. But really, what I'm looking for in this game, I need an offensive explosion. Like, we need the offense to put up, I'm hoping at least 50, dude. We really haven't seen it this year, dude. I mean, even the NC State game, it's like, yeah, some of that was offense. A lot of that was defense, in my opinion. I mean, we obviously had the pick six in that game. But we haven't had, like, an offensive explosion. I mean, really in SEC play. I was talking about that just last week, and we should have against Kentucky. We already talked about that. We should have against Kentucky, but we didn't. But this, I mean, good Lord, if there's any game to get right, it's against this historically bad Mississippi State defense. So, yeah, I mean, and defensively, it's just business as usual to me. Like, it's like at this point, if you can stop Alabama's offense, then really, there's not many teams that you can't stop, in my opinion. And they've just, at this point, I have full faith in the defense. Like, I have full faith in the secondary. I have full faith in the defense as a unit. We should have significantly more depth in the trenches than Mississippi State. I mean, really, there's not. I mean, if I think we have the most depth in college football, then of course we're going to have more depth than the worst SEC team. So, yeah.
Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah, yeah. Defensively, yeah, their offense is like middle of the pack to bottom in the SEC, and Van Buren is. It's hard to tell. I've not watched him a ton. He's got a little bit of mobility to him, but he's more of like a pocket passer. So in terms of like game planning too, there's not as much of a concern for them to break some big plays like we've had happen previously when Hawkins came in and with Lagway, people that are mobile, even Milrow. So the D line should be able to feast because of that. I mean, you'd almost expect that Mississippi State's game plan is going to be run the ball, which they're terrible at. They average like 3.8 yards per carry or something as a team in the season. And then just quick passing game, which has worked a little bit on us. But if you can't get the offense rolling with that, then the second they get behind and they got to start throwing the ball deep, JPJ and then
they're going to take over. And if your game plan is running the ball against this Tennessee defense, I mean, that's good luck. I mean, that's just not going to work out, dude. I mean, really, no one's been able to run the ball against us. Kentucky hit off that one big run to start the game, and that was it, really. I mean, we're just we're so good in the run game, especially in short yardage situations. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely – it's one of those games, yeah, it could be a trap game, but it's at home. And honestly, Heupel's done really well in these situations, like in a situation where you have a big game coming up, but you don't crap the bed the week before. So he's done really well in those situations. So I expect that to continue. But really, dude, I think the story this week is where are we looking, or where are we at in the playoff picture? Where are we at in college football as a whole right now? What do you think our chances of making the playoffs are at this point? And I think the biggest question is 10-2 enough? Because coming into the year, okay, and I said this multiple times. I've been on record saying this on the podcast that a 10-win SEC team will make the playoffs 100% of the time. I really believe that. In a 12-team format, it'll happen 100% of the time. What I didn't expect is that there's 4 Big Ten teams in the conversation. There's at least 2 Big 12 teams in the conversation. There's at this point, it's really just 2 ACC teams in the conversation. At this point, dude, there's a lot of teams at the top of college football, and I don't know if 10 wins is going to do it. I really don't.
It's kind of like it reminds me of 22 again, which was the most tragic possible outcome. Where after we lost to South Carolina, we needed a handful of things to happen, and they happened, and we saw Alabama bias take over, and we didn't make it. And I'm genuinely concerned that the same type of thing could happen. Because you're already seeing all these ESPN writers and stuff like putting Alabama over us if we finished, like basically saying the winner of LSU Alabama is getting in. And it's like, how could that possibly be true when we went head to head? And in 22, it at least made a remote sense because same thing happened at Florida State last year.
Yep.
Yeah, Hooker went down, we're a different team. And the same thing happened, probably a worse situation being undefeated and not getting into the playoff without Jordan Travis, but we now see how terrible they are without him. But yeah, I think the problem too is that if we have 2 wins, these 3 games outside of Georgia matter so much in terms of how we look, and that's where we can't afford to start slow again. We can't afford to only beat Mississippi State by 10, 15 points, because if we do that this week, the second we lose to Georgia, honestly, the committee's probably not paying attention to us. They're not even watching because, and if we do lose to Georgia, you've got to make that. It's got to be a 1-score game, most likely to even be considered in the conversation. Because, again, we've got teams that are right behind us, and the CFP rankings come out tomorrow. And I think, at minimum, Indiana's probably jumping us because we've seen historically they tend to like to rank undefeated teams with a healthy quarterback. And then there's a chance BYU jumps us. So we could be sitting at 9 come tomorrow. And then that puts that ladder of working our way into the top 12. If we lose to Georgia, an uphill battle that would be tough to overcome.
I totally agree with everything you said, dude. I think Vol fans probably, or I think some Tennessee fans, we're fans of college football, so we understand, but some Vol fans really are just paying attention to Vols in the SEC. If you look outside the footprint, man, there are a lot of good teams. And you mentioned Indiana, you mentioned BYU. Well, we got to understand there's going to be a group of 5. The group of 5 gets an automatic bid, so that's one spot taken up. And if we lose to Georgia, the first 4 spots are out of the question because we're not making the conference championship. And then you have Notre Dame sitting there. Notre Dame is pretty much guaranteed to make the playoff at this point. All they have to do is win out in a terrible schedule. So now you're looking at it, okay, there's 6 spots left. Okay, well, looking at the Big Ten, if people aren't paying attention to the Big Ten right now, worst case scenario is playing out in the Big Ten right now for us. I will say that. Worst case scenario, in my opinion. Because Penn State, if they win out, dude, they're making the playoff with 1 loss. Well, what can happen now is Oregon's likely going undefeated. Okay, so Oregon's going to go undefeated. Indiana could go undefeated. Okay, let's say Indiana and Oregon both go undefeated. That would mean Indiana beat Ohio State because they play in the regular season. They play in the conference championship. Both those teams are going to make it. If Indiana beats Ohio State, they're going to make it. And now you're looking at Penn State and Ohio State, okay? Penn State would have 1 loss in that scenario, dude. They're making it. Their 1 loss is to Ohio State. They're 100% making it in that scenario. And then what's scary is the 10-2 Ohio State Buckeyes. Because trust me when I say this, dude. Trust me. 10-2 Ohio State is a lock to make the playoff. I think the SEC teams aren't a lock, but 10-2 Ohio State, if they lose a close game to Indiana, dude, we're looking at 4 Big Ten teams. And even if Indiana loses to Ohio State, okay, even in that scenario where they lose to Ohio State, okay, now we're looking at 11-1 Indiana, 11-1 Ohio State making the conference championship. It's like, dude, that's 4 teams still.
And that's just the Big Ten. And what's crazy is the Alabama bias could still come back to bite us at any point because they moved up 3 spots this week. They didn't play. And now, if you combine that scenario with a scenario that's one thing that I'm going to be fascinated to see is how the committee handles 1-loss teams losing conference championships that have 2 losses.
Such a good
because.
point.
And that's gonna be interesting because we have no recollection of that whatsoever because it's never really happened. The closest we ever came to that was 2 years ago when TCU lost and undefeated. They were 12-1. They were locked. Yeah, and it's like they didn't even debate it. They were like they're getting in. So
of course,
if worst case scenario, like combining that with Clemson going to the ACC championship game and beating Miami at 10-2, they're both getting in. And then you still have SMU sitting there with 1 loss. There's a tragedy where 3 ACC teams could still get in because of the automatic qualifier. That could happen. And then if say, SMU ends up making it or one of the teams has 1 loss in their conference championship, they lose in the conference championship to have 2. How far do they drop? Do you move a team that didn't make their conference championship with 2 losses above that team and punish them for making it? That's going to be interesting to see.
It's a very good point. I think what we need to root for in the ACC, this is what Tennessee fans need to write down. We need undefeated Miami. We want them to win their conference because if they don't win their conference, remember people, it's an automatic bid. So if Clemson finds their way in the ACC championship and wins it, it's an automatic bid. It doesn't matter. I do think the way it's playing out right now that we're going to see Miami and SMU. I think SMU probably wins out. And remember, SMU still has a 1-game cushion in the ACC because they lost to BYU. That's not a conference game. So they're still undefeated in the conference. And, man, I have to look at the rest of their schedule. But I think the rest of their schedule, they're going to be favored in every game if I'm not mistaken. So we're looking at SMU versus Miami in the conference championship. I think the committee would do the right thing in that scenario. If Miami blew out SMU, I think SMU wouldn't make it. I think because it's a weaker conference. Yeah. You're looking at it, but again, that's 11-win team. Do you keep 11-win team out of the playoff?
It's going to be fascinating. And just looking at their schedule, SMU has Boston College, at Virginia, California.
Yeah,
they're probably not losing.
They're winning out.
And yeah, we would need them to not look great doing that. And then, yeah, Miami just needs to slaughter them. But, yeah, unfortunately, I've not rooted for Miami this year, but we need Miami to just make the ACC look like the rest of it is terrible, and they're the only team.
Yes. I think Clemson's eliminated at this point, but, if they make it into the ACC championship, then everything's open. It's going to be pretty hard for them to make it in the ACC championship at this point. I don't know how the tiebreakers would work, but, dude, we really need SMU to drop a game, because now that I think about it, dude, if they lose a close game, the ACC championship, and then your two losses are undefeated BYU potentially and undefeated Miami, how do you leave that 11-2 team out of the playoff?
And with the Big 12, what's really interesting with it is, and the problem too is that the more BYU wins, the better SMU looks with their record, which makes their 11-2.
Yeah, exactly.
They're probably going to roll to, and this is where again the automatic bids blow everything out of the water, because Iowa State's sitting down there at 17 right now. If they win their conference championship, they're in. They're going to get a top 4 seed, and then at that point, if BYU's undefeated and lose their conference championship, they're in. And the rest of their schedule, they've got, this week is really the only week I think they have a chance of losing. They have the Holy War game against Utah. It's at Utah, so that could happen. But even then, it's like you have the one-loss BYU, one-loss Iowa State, which would be probably best-case scenario, because then the conference champ probably they get in, but I doubt that the 11-2 team gets in from the Big 12 at that point, because it's just so weak. But again, the more they win, SMU, their only loss being an undefeated BYU is a good look.
Dude, this is scaring me, man, having this conversation, because I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't think I can remember, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I can remember a year where the top 15 teams are all in the conversation. Like, because because you brought up 2022, dude, number 5 and number 6 were 10-2 that year. Number 5 and number 6. The first 2 teams out were both 10-2. And then you also had TCU losing their conference championship. That year was wide open. That year we would have been a lock to make the playoffs. This season, there's no chance. I mean, we already mentioned the 4 Big Ten teams. We're looking at, I think the way the ACC is going to play out, worst case scenario, dude, it's SMU and Miami. I mean, that's what we're looking at. That's 2 ACC teams. You mentioned the Big 12. Oh, I pray there's only one Big 12 team, man, because if there's not, we're completely screwed. I mean, we're completely screwed.
Comes out of Iowa State, those Texans. If they win the conference, and that's where the automatic bid, and we've talked about it before, but the automatic bid just it could break some things. And we could immediately see this year if like a 2 or 3 loss team ends up winning a conference championship.
And honestly, this is the year where the automatic bid for although Boise State's been great, I will say they competed well with Oregon, but man, that Group of 5 team. I mean, you put a Group of 5 in over a 10-2 Tennessee team. I don't know, man. That's pretty tough. And they're undefeated. I mean, they get the automatic bid, so it's a guarantee. Like, whoever wins, honestly, yeah. I mean, that's just kind of tough. But I mean, again, we're looking at. I mean, I named 7 teams from the other conferences, and then the Notre Dame and the Group of 5. So that leaves 3 spots left. I mean, 3 spots left, and one of those are the SEC champion. I mean, that's a guaranteed. And then, dude. I mean, Texas, like, okay, let's say Texas. Okay, let's look at Texas. So if they go 11-1 and lose to Georgia in the SEC championship, or maybe they win and Georgia loses, both those teams are getting in. So we're looking, I think in that scenario, we're looking at 1 spot left. And that's when it comes down to, like you say, 10-2 Alabama, 10-2 LSU, like 10-2 Ole Miss. Like, who knows what happens with Ole Miss. So it's... I mean, I'm looking at this. I really believe at this point, to make the playoff, we have to beat Georgia. That's where I'm at. Unless there's absolute carnage in college football, with everything we just laid out, we have to beat Georgia at this point. It's just too many good teams at the top.
I completely agree. It's the only way to definitively get us a spot, because to your point, like, the winner of Alabama LSU is a problem. And then you still have Texas A&M and Ole Miss with 2 losses, where if Ole Miss manages to beat Georgia, honestly, the thing we really need to root for is just top-heavy. It's just Texas and Georgia to dominate the rest of the season. Because that way we're kind of keeping those other teams out, because Texas A&M play at the end of the year. If Texas A&M loses that, they're done.
They're
3 losses, they're out. This week, we kind of need Georgia to beat Ole Miss. If Georgia beats Ole Miss this week, that guarantees they're not a part of the conversation. And then us beating Georgia controls our own destiny. Even if we lose them at that point, there's less SEC teams there that can hop us. It would really only leave the winner of LSU Alabama as the only other team that would have an argument, which gets really interesting, because I want to say that they wouldn't do it, but they would put Alabama ahead of them. Like, the CFP committee would do it again. And with LSU, their loss is about as bad as ours with Arkansas, and they have the USC loss at the beginning of the year on there. So it's like how you weigh that versus the wins they have. But yeah, I mean, honestly, across the board, I think we kind of need to root for domination from the top teams.
Yeah,
we need Miami to dominate the rest of the season. We
And
need Oregon to
BYU.
dominate. We need Georgia and Texas to just win their games and knock these teams that are kind of frying for it out. And then it can condense down to where we've got like 8 teams fighting for those last 6 spots, and it's a little bit better for us. And then no chaos from, teams that are ranked in the teens, 17 plus, winning their conference championship and blowing everything up.
Like Kansas State. That's another team that could go on and win their conference
championship. And Iowa State are both sitting there, and Colorado, crazy.
Exactly, dude.
Which is wild, but they could.
Oh, what a disaster,
a lot of those teams control their own destiny with the rest of their schedules, and it could be absolute carnage. And that's the worst case scenario, is these teams like Indiana and them go undefeated, and they just lose their conference championship games, and it doesn't matter. They're still in. And then 4 Big Ten teams are a lock at that point, and then it's going to be, and it's wild because, we talked about it a lot, you guys talked about on the pod, like, we going into the season, we were like, a 10-2 SEC team, you're in the playoff.
It's a lock.
Like, no question.
It's a lock.
And now we're sitting here, like, looking at it, like, wow, we may, probably not. You're not. There may be 3 2-10 teams that don't make the playoff as an SEC team.
It's 100% possible.
Parity in college football this year is at like an all-time high. Oregon has by far looked the best, but then they still have a 3-point win over Boise State, which is really interesting. So, like, the college football is just wide open this year, which is great for the sport and the 12-team playoffs starting this year.
But
sucks for us.
This sucks for us so hard. And, dude, this goes back to a point we've made several times. The margin of victory and the margin of losses at this point are crucial, dude. Are crucial. Because let me tell you this, Vol fans. Don't even get your hopes up. If we get blown out by Georgia, it's over. The season is over. Okay?
We're there.
Exactly. I don't care what happens. I don't care what happens in the Vanderbilt game. We are not making the playoff, and we shouldn't. Let's be honest. If we're being completely objective on this podcast, which I'm usually not, I'll be honest. I'm completely biased, like 90% of the time. But if I'm being totally honest, that we shouldn't make it if we get blown out to Georgia. You have to show that you can compete with the best teams in college football, and there have been plenty of teams that have competed with Georgia this year, dude. Kentucky played them close. Florida just played them close. Mississippi State played them close. There are plenty, and Texas should have played them closer, frankly. And of course, Alabama beat them. So there is no reason we shouldn't be able to compete with Georgia. There's no reason. It comes down to the road woes. Like, can we figure that out? And yeah, man, it's going to be interesting. But let me tell you, Vol fans, if we get blown out to Georgia, just accept we are not making the playoffs. It's not happening.
And to your point, the margin of victory right now mattering more than ever, and the part of that is due to the fact that going into the season, we looked at our schedule and we were like, this is a pretty solid schedule. And now looking back on it, most of our quality wins are not good. Oklahoma sucks now. NC State, complete garbage. And we consider that a ranked win. Like, we really have the one quality win right now, which is Alabama. You could still maybe throw at Oklahoma in there, but they've gotten obliterated by other teams so far. So it really means that, if we end this season with losses to Arkansas and Georgia on the road, and our only real quality wins being a home victory over Alabama, and then maybe a home win over Vandy is our next best win, then, yeah, so objectively, it's hard to say that is deserving of a playoff spot if we get blown out.
I 1,000% agree with that, dude. And you know what's crazy? It's literally playing out with like 2022, but the 12-team version. And the bad road loss happened earlier in the season. And because we're looking at the 2022 season, all you have to do is beat South Carolina and you're in. Doesn't happen. Well, now turns out that Arkansas loss could cost us a playoff spot. It could cost us a playoff spot again, and that's brutal, man. Because, dude, I mean, if we replay that game, we probably win 90% of the time. It's just like one of those things. It's just it's very frustrating as a Vol fan, dude. We could look back on the season and be like, God, that damn Arkansas game, dude. Like, what the hell are we doing?
It's so likely that is what happens, and I do think there's a scenario, and again, like with the Mississippi State game this week, if we go out there and we put on an offensive show and our defense plays like they have been, then that gets some more hype around us going into the Georgia game, which is massive. And then if we do lose a close game in Athens, it's a lot less likely we plummet in the rankings because beating the crap out of Mississippi State is step one. And then that game sets the tone for the rest of the season. And we're only going to have playing Georgia this late is unfortunate too because another thing that plays a role in these rankings is when you lose. And a team like Clemson was a great example of that. They're kind of out of it now, but they lost week 1, and they fought their way back in the top 10. If you flip that around and they play that game at the end of the season, they're not in the conversation because of when you lost. And that's what's unfortunate about playing Georgia week 10 this year is we get UTEP. And then, honestly, a tough at Vandy game to try to work our way back into the conversation. That's not much time. And against Vanderbilt, who played every single team tight this year and has an epic win over Alabama, there's just not going to be enough time to salvage a loss like that. So, obviously, step one is beating Mississippi State this week and handling business and looking good doing it. We have reached a point where we can't, if the end goal is playoff, which it is for all Vols fans, that was the expectation.
Of course.
It's no longer just, we gritted out the win. We've got to dominate. We've got to look like a playoff team this week.
And this team's good enough to be a playoff team. That's the frustrating thing. It's not like exactly. This is it's really an all-time defense. And that might be hyperbole. Oh, it's 100% a championship caliber defense, and people might think that's hyperbole. It's really not, dude. I mean, not giving up 20 points in a single game is absurd. It's unheard of, especially as Tennessee fans. We're looking at this as like, dude, this is the best defense since the early 2000s. So it's literally been 20 years since we've had this level of defense. So it's a championship caliber team. It would be incredibly unfortunate if we missed the playoff going 10-2, but this year it's just looking like that's gonna happen. I mean, it could happen, and so I really think it'd be the most Vol thing to do. By the way, dude, the most Vol thing to do would be beat Georgia on the road and then lose to Vandy and miss the playoff because you lose to Vandy.
Honestly, if we beat Georgia, I think I'm immediately going to be like, we're losing to Vanderbilt. It's done. Pencil it in. It's happening.
Dude, I know.
With things how they happen, and that's 100%. We will beat Georgia. We'll be on our high horse. We're going to roll in the SEC championship. Playoff is a lock, and then Vanderbilt smack us in the mouth.
Dude, and you make a great point about Vanderbilt. Me and Blake have talked about this. We haven't really touched on it a lot because we're really focusing on the Georgia game. But, dude, that Vanderbilt game, trust me, that it's going to go into the fourth quarter. Don't expect that to be a blowout, Ball fans. They go in. I've never seen a team, bro, go into every game with how much talent they have, which is not a lot of talent. They have zero talent essentially. Go into every game knowing they're going to win. They actually they know they're going to win. They don't because they play teams that are way better, but they think they're going to win every single game.
They really do, and Clark Lee deserves a lot of credit. Unfortunately for Vanderbilt fans, they're probably about to get another James Franklin situation where they finally get a good coach, and he's going to be gone.
He's immediately gone.
Immediately. And they have the thing that I will say that with that game that makes me feel slightly better is if they were going into that with a bowl berth on the line, we're done.
Yeah.
The good news is they already made it. But the bad news is they're playing every team like crazy, and they are going to want to win that stable. They are going to show up. So don't want to look too far ahead because obviously we've got to take care of business. But overall, the gist of all this is essentially we've got an uphill battle. Yes. We control our own destiny, but it is an uphill battle. We got to win tough games, or we're going to need help to be able to solidify a playoff spot.
It's crazy how much is really on the line in the Georgia game. We're talking about a game that could get us into the let's say we win that game. We're looking at a conference championship appearance, okay, guaranteed playoff berth, probably a home playoff game. That's what happens. Or a bye if we win the conference championship. That's best case scenario with a win. Worst case scenario with a loss, the season's done. There's no playoff. You're in a random bowl game that no one's going to watch. That's literally how much. I mean, it's essentially a playoff game in November is what it is. Which is it's insane because people are like, oh, the regular season's going to be devalued with a 12-team playoff. No, That's nope. That literally everything's on the line. Really for both teams, even for Georgia. I mean, Georgia loses that game late, they might not be in the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, we got Mississippi State this week. Should be able to take care of business. Offense should play well.
Bad defense.
Yeah, historically bad defense. I mean, we're talking about like Kent State level defense here, but in the SEC.
Golden Flash has taken.
Oh, they always, dude. They grab a stray at least once an episode. That's part of the podcast. You got to throw a stray to the Golden Flashes at least once per episode. But yeah, man. I mean, take care of business this week, and then, huge week after that, man. Huge week after that. Anything else on the Mississippi State preview or looking forward or anything like that, man?
So this will actually be my first game this season going to it.
Oh,
so
sweet.
I'll actually be at the Mississippi State game. So excited to get to see Nico and the team in person. Hopefully I get to witness the turning point in our season of them putting it all together. So we're going to be excited to be in person for that and watch the historically bad defense try to stop us. So excited for that. But yeah, I think this week, taking it one week at a time, we've got to take care of business this week. But we are now at that point where we have to look good doing it. So no more 7-point first halves. We got to score 21, 24 on these guys in the first half at least.
Yeah,
then just carry that momentum into the second half and look good. So hopefully, I mean, game planning wise, they tend to have something. I mean, Tim Banks has been in his bag all season, so I'm not concerned about Van Buren in that offense, but we'll see how it goes.
All right, man. What about score prediction time? Score prediction. Hit me with one.
All right. I think the offense gets it together. It's still not a huge game, but I'm going to say 45-10.
Okay. 45-10. I like that. I'll probably be in the same ballpark. I'm going to give their offense a little bit more credit, even though our defense is so good. I'm going to say, I think it's going to be an offense explosion, man. I'm going to go 55-13. 55-13. That's my final score prediction. We need a big win going into that Georgia week, as we said. So yeah, man, Dakota will be at the game. I might go to the game. I might be going to the game with Callie. We'll see. Either way, hoping for another big Vol win. And again, we appreciate y'all watching. A little bit different. Dakota is new to the podcast. I'm sure we'll have him on again at some point. Filling in for Blake this week at his wedding. Again, shout out to Blake, other half of this podcast, and congratulations to him on getting married. And he should be back for the Georgia preview after and the Mississippi State review as well. So we appreciate y'all watching. Usually catch us on Mondays and Thursdays. We might change it to Mondays and Wednesdays for the preview shows. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we will catch you all on the next one.
Appreciate it, man. Go Vols.
Yep, GBO.